This is how you do multiple text language analysis. I'll talk you through the structure and how it's flexible, obviously. The acronyms we use are as follows. We use FATCAT for the intro, but you can also use FLAPC if that helps. The important part is always to connect them up, make them intertwined. So the contention is linked to the arguments, which is linked to the tone, which is linked to the techniques, which is linked to all those sort of things. So the structure within the introduction is pretty much up to you, but you probably want to be ticking off either FLAPC or FATCAT so that you know that you're doing the basics. And then of course you signpost first, second, third, what you're talking about. So what arguments you're going to talk about, what authors, what techniques, how you're going to group it. And that'll be important next because I'll talk about the structures that you can pick based on what you're looking at. It's important to be sort of flexible, I guess. So we've got the body paragraph. You're looking to basically have argument, language, effect, audience, or argument, technique, effect, audience. Either way, it's the same thing. You're talking about an argument and how it's backed up by the technique, what effect that has and who it is aimed to be having that effect on. Conclusion, author, contention, arguments, tone. Pretty simple, pretty short. Intro and conclusion, you don't, as long as you cover all the things you have to cover, you're not going to, there's not really an amazing example of a good or a bad one. So just sort of get it done and focus on the main comparative, not comparison, mind you, the main body of the text, which is where you show off your skills. So basically, the main thing you're going to have to do when you go into the SAC is look at basically everything that's on the page. So if there's 5 pictures, you're going to have to talk about 5 pictures. If there's 3 texts, a letter, a comment, a Facebook post, a Instagram, a tweet, whatever you're looking at, an Instagram post, I guess, you're going to just look at that and think of how you're going to approach it. So you've got 3 paragraphs or 2, depending on which one you prefer. And then you're going to think, looking at the text, how can I break this up and make it make sense? So you could always do text 1 here, text 2 there, or you could do some kind of combination where they go side by side, side by side, side by side, or 2 paragraphs side by side. But again, that'll be based on what you're looking at in front of you. So I'm going to take you through all of the previous exams except for the one that they redacted because it made the news. And there was an actual cafe named in it and all those sort of things. But so this from 2014, ages and ages and ages ago. So I might even use a stylus, but you can see here we've got 4 bits. So we've got speech 1, and we've got basically a response to that piece, and then we've got 2 images. So the 2 images are within this one text, so you would probably want to look at it as text 1 plus images maybe. So you could do that, and then make your third be that little comparison there. That's probably how you'd approach that one, but you could also do a side-by-side comparison where you're talking about, as we've said, article, images, and put them side by side. But up to you, whichever one makes more sense to you. 2015 is all one speech supported by 2 images. So you probably want to have at least 1 paragraph where you talk about the 2 images and how they related to that article. But that one's pretty straightforward. This is all one piece. This one again, we've got letter 1, letter 2, or actually I think it's a speech and a letter, but that's not that important, that's essentially. So you've got text 1, text 2, and then you've got a graphic. So that seems pretty straightforward that you could do them as sort of 1 by 1 by 1, and maybe do the image in the same paragraph maybe. So you could do just 2 paragraphs, or you could do 3. Or you could technically go by arguments and break it up, but because this response is so short, it probably doesn't have 3 significant arguments to talk about. 2017. So the main thing that they talked about in the examiner's report for this one was that not many people talked about this image bit. And so everyone talked about the bin bags, huzzah, good for them. But not many people talked about the kind of the tree and the lead and inspire and the pun and all those sort of things. So we've got 2 bits there. We've got the newsletter from the principal, and then we've got a response. So again, we've got 4. So we probably want to group all of these together. And again, you can sort of see naturally 3 arguments in this piece. So you could probably do like a comparison of arguments. But again, up to you. Just make sure you talk about everything and think about the structure of how it works. This one was easy. 1 speech, 2 images. So whether you want to do each image separately or you'd want to do 3 arguments and add in the image images and where they fit is entirely up to you. But again, whatever makes sense to you. I would say for this one, I would attach the first image to the first argument and the last image to the last argument and do some other argument in between and just structure it that way. 2020, again, 2 images, 1 response. So you can see sort of a little bit of a pattern happening between the most recent ones. So they've kind of narrowed it down a little bit, but again, you always have to be flexible on what could happen. So again, you'd break it up into 3 arguments and you would think about, I just worked on this recently with some baby teachers, soon-to-be teachers, and so you could attach, the images to the relevant articles, relative arguments, the relevant ones rather. All right, so introduction, it's not that exciting. Flap C or fat cat pick. Obviously talking about arguments is the important part, and as we often talk about, you probably want to say argument, technique, tone as sort of your first sentence in a paragraph, and you might want to do that for the intro as well, just so you can copy it across. But basically you're just pointing out what's happening, so there's not too much exciting stuff happening here. The 2 tricky ones are argument and context. You could probably pause it and read over that, or open that up and look through it, but these are the trickier parts. This is where you sort of show your excellence. So if you talk about context really well, then that will raise your score above other people's, and likewise the arguments, if you respond to them really well, then that will set up your discussion later on. We've got some example intros. Again, we won't go through it, but basically you list off the relevant things for each piece. You talk about the signposts, and then if you want, you could have a little bit of context down here. We sort of outline what's going on. That's the idea anyway. But again, if you want to open that up in your own time and compare it to how you're doing your own, that might be useful. Body paragraphs. This is sort of the basic one. So argument, language, effect, audience, or argument technique, argument word choice, argument connotations, anything like that. As long as you're talking about words and giving examples, quotes, you're doing all right. And yeah, you want to talk about tonal shifts. So you're not just saying it was in this tone, you're saying that shifted to this tone or it started in this tone. The more specific you can be about audience groups, the better. And you definitely want to talk about effect, but you want to do it subtly. You don't want to be so overt that it sounds like, a rhetorical question forces everyone to stand up in their seat and answer it. Modal verbs is how you do that. So you say, perhaps, likely, considers, possibly, suggests, indicates, those sort of like not confident verbs, but sort of perhaps could be the case. Comparatives, not that important, but you want to be connecting up your arguments if you're putting them side by side, and consider how the audience is positioned. So where are they being asked to? Are they the experts? Are they sort of just listeners? How do they fit? Do they have power? Are they empowered? Are they asked to be emotional? Are they asked to use their brains? How are they being positioned by the author or the speaker? Now, if you are doing a side-by-side, it gets a bit complicated and it looks a bit ugly, but obviously you want your topic sentence, you want your linking sentence, like with any essay that we've ever done. And again, for the topic sentence, you want to have argument, technique, and tone for each one. Compare if you're doing it as a side-by-side, and then again, argument, technique, tone. So this is just giving a bit of an overview. This author says that drones are dangerous in a scared tone, and he uses the techniques of rhetorical question, just sort of big picture. And then in the argument section, we get into a lot more detail and explore how each technique is aimed at different people, how it might work, all those sort of things. As you can see, not really comparative, but you're just going to connect it up. So whereas or therefore, or probably not therefore, but you're just going to say next up, essentially, is all you're saying. You're not saying better, worse, or anything like that. Then conclusion, very simple, very sharp, very short. Author, contention, arguments, tone, and that's sort of it. Try and avoid sort of summarizing anything in too much detail, and avoid trying to say this one was better than the other one.